I work on conservation of working landscapes, mostly here in the Southwest, working with ranchers, and I was practicing my talk earlier today, and I realized at some point that I kind of take an approach that assumes that having ranchers on the landscape, having them out there managing, and yes, having cattle out on public and private lands is a good thing, is part of the solution and not part of the problem. And I know that that is not necessarily a widely held view, or may at least be a controversial view, but hopefully I can at least a little bit in 3 minutes here convince you that ranchers are at least part of the solution to maintaining and protecting large landscapes and keeping good quality habitat for species that need big blocks of land out there and functioning. So, I work here in southern Arizona. I think we would all agree that southern Arizona is a pretty special place, right? That's why we live here. The ecological diversity we have here is unmatched. We have the Sky Islands, high mountain peaks, Douglas fir forests. I grew up outside of Seattle. When you go to the top of Mount Graham or to Mount Lemmon, those forests up there are the same forests that I grew up backpacking in outside of Seattle. So that's pretty incredible. We're down here in the desert Southwest, and yet you have this wet Douglas fir forest at the top of our mountain peaks. At the same time, you have these low desert valleys that are covered with cholla and mesquite, what you think of as desert, and in between are these lush grasslands. And those grasslands are what support our ranching industry here in Arizona and throughout the rest of the Southwest. And this ecological diversity provides habitat for a wide range of species, and many of these species require big blocks of land. So, Stephanie, if you were at the last one of these events, she talked about her research, but she studies Sonoran pronghorn. They need big blocks of land. My work takes place in the context of jaguars. So back in the 1990s, a rancher who was out hunting mountain lion treed what he thought was a mountain lion and turned out to be a jaguar. And that was the first time since at least the 1960s that a jaguar had been seen in Arizona. And I think, the reason for that, and this is maybe surprising to some people, the reason that jaguars were able to come back to the United States, to Arizona and New Mexico, is because we have these big interconnected landscapes, and ranchers are the reason for that. And so my work focuses on how we keep ranchers in place and how we improve the quality of habitat while having ranchers on the land. So, management of public and private rangelands has really improved since the 1960s, since that last jaguar that we know of before the one that was pictured in the 90s, was found again before jaguars went away. Range management in the 60s was a different thing. I just completed a survey of ranchers here in southern Arizona, and we found that nearly all ranchers, about 90% of ranchers, are implementing modern rotational grazing. Now, that probably doesn't mean that much to someone who's not in range management, but it's really easy to see the difference on the ground between a ranch that's using rotational grazing and one that's using year-round grazing. The best place to do this is right on a fence line. If you can find a fence line with one ranch on one side that's year-round grazing, just letting the cattle out and letting them graze where they want all year, and on the other side, a rancher that's using rotational grazing is moving cattle from one paddock to the next, from one pasture to the next. That one on the rotational grazing side of the fence is going to have perennial bunch grasses that are knee-high. When you read about what the range looked like when white settlers first came to the Southwest, that talk about spur-high grass, it'll look like that. On the other side of the fence, you'll have little stubby, short annual grasses. And so the difference that we see in grazing management since the 1980s, when rotational grazing has been adopted on a wide scale, is pretty dramatic. And this rotational grazing helps to maintain habitat for a wide range of species, including jaguar. The other thing we found in our survey is that 3/4 of the ranchers are already implementing management practices specifically for wildlife. So not for cattle, but for wildlife. So the ranchers see themselves as stewards of the land. And land stewardship is a core part of their identity. At the same time, the economics of ranching are really tough. On a normal year, most ranchers in Arizona will lose money. So you need either high cattle prices, you need a lot of rain, or some combination of those things in order for most ranchers to make money. And that's a real problem. So if we want to keep these landscapes connected, keep the habitat there for these large species like pronghorn and large predators like mountain lions and jaguars, we need to find a way to make ranching work better here. Otherwise, the alternative is loss of ranches, development, subdivision, fragmentation of the landscape, and loss of these species that I think are the reason most of us live here. So what I'm working on is investigating strategies to improve the economic resiliency of ranches here in the Southwest. What does a conservation incentive program look like for ranchers? What would they be willing to participate in? How should it be structured? What can we learn from other places and bring here to Southern Arizona? These are the core questions I'm looking at and what we're trying to understand. And we've been conducting focus groups and surveys and workshops with the ranchers. And so far we found they're very interested in this idea and willing to diversify their operations and not just make money from raising cows, but make money from implementing conservation. And I think that's really exciting. So that's what I work on a day-to-day basis. The Carson Scholarship for me has been really important in helping me to get my research out into the world. I've been able to use the money to go attend 2 major international conferences. So one last semester, the biennial meeting of the Community on Ecosystem Services, which is the largest group of, or largest meeting for practitioners of payment for ecosystem services programs, so the types of things that myself and Nikki work on. And in May, I'll be going to the International Association of the Commons meeting, which is a meeting that a lot of people that work on these sort of issues and large landscape conservation and how you work with mixtures in public and private land and different land tenure issues go to. So it's a community that I really need to be engaged in, so it'll give me that opportunity. So thank you. Thanks.